Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel Get Cozy, or welcome if you're new here. It is early August, so it is planner season, and Hobonichi is starting to release their products for their 2027 lineup, which will be launching at the end of the month. A lot of other companies are coming out with their planners as well, and a lot of these planners and notebooks have Tomoe River Paper in them, so I felt like this was a good time to make this video. Like my other paper review videos, I will be evaluating the fountain pen friendliness of this paper. I'm also going to be doing a comprehensive deep dive, and there is a lot there with this paper. If you know anything about the history of Tomoe River, you'll know that this paper used to be a holy grail for fountain pen lovers. Before the rights of Tomoe River Paper were bought by Sanzen and they started manufacturing this paper. Now it is very hit or miss. So I'm going to be giving a comprehensive timeline of this paper, the company who originally produced it, and what happened when Sanzen took over production. I'll also be talking about my own experience with Tomoe River Paper. You can see that I have a lot of notebooks here. I have 13. Most of them are Hobonichi, but not all of them. And so what I'm going to be doing is I will also be testing each of these 13 notebooks with fountain pens and evaluate their performance. After I do that, I'm going to be a little bit nerdy and do some data analysis on the results because I have a lot of questions that I want to answer, and I want to see if we can get some data to help us answer these questions. The first is pre-Sanzen Tamagawa Tomoe River Paper actually better with fountain pens? The second question is there a singular bad batch of Tomoe River Paper that we can use this information to trace back to? I also want to know if we can predict which notebooks or companies have good versus bad Tomoe River paper. Has the quality of this paper actually declined over the years? And can we predict what the quality of this paper will be like in the 2027 Hobonichi lineup products? I'm also going to be talking about the lore of machine number 7 from Tamagawa, hopefully clear up some misinformation online. This paper has a very confusing and weird history, so my goal is to provide some clarity and give you a better sense of how this paper handles fountain pens and what to expect from the quality of this paper in the 2027 Hobonichi launch, as well as for future notebooks with Tomoe River Paper. I want to acknowledge that, yes, this is a pretty long video. It is a deep dive, so thank you so much for being here. I want to encourage you to grab a snack, your favorite beverage. Feel free to skip around if there's a certain section that doesn't really interest you, and let's get into it. Okay, so this is my most recent purchase of a notebook with Tomoe River Paper in it. Tomoe River Paper is known to be very, very thin, and that's really useful for whenever you're trying to put in a lot of pages into a single notebook. You can fit more without as much bulk. And so originally when Tomoe River Paper was being created, a big drive for the use of that paper's production was actually for Bibles. If you've ever held a Bible or flipped through a Bible, you'll know that Bible paper is often very, very thin and honestly a lot like this. So now this one is a Hobonichi product, and this is an A6 size notebook with grids on it. Hobonichi is not the only company to use Tomoe River Paper. Tomoe River Paper is produced currently by Sanzen, and then other companies will purchase Tomoe River Paper to create other notebooks. So Nanbol is a line of notebooks from, I believe, Kinokuniya, and several years ago they did use Tomoe River Paper in their notebooks. They no longer do that ever since the rights of Tomoe River Paper were sold to Sanzen. Sakai is another company that creates notebooks using Tomoe River Paper. They also create the Arofal paper notebook. I will link that video down below. I've already done a review on that, but they create Tomoe River Paper notebooks. Lockbee is another company that creates notebooks with Tomoe River Paper. This Tomoe River Paper is actually a bit denser, so this is 68 GSM, whereas the other ones that I've mentioned so far are 52 GSM, so a little bit thinner than the Lockbee notebooks. And then the other one that I have is from JetPens. This is the Kanzo Noto notebook. This is a notebook that also just has really bad Tomoe River paper in it, so I will talk more about that here shortly. Now, when paper is produced, it is created out of fibers and pulp that are eventually pressed into sheets and dried, and it becomes paper. It's a little bit more complex than that, but that's the basic idea. Now, fiber and pulp love water, and a lot of inks used in fountain pens are water-based, so they will absorb the water, and typically it will spread through capillary action, and that's why sometimes on printer paper or lower quality papers, you will see ink spread whenever you use a water-based ink like fountain pen ink. So the idea with a treatment to make paper more fountain pen friendly is to prevent that. And so that is to make the paper more hydrophobic. And so there's two different ways to do that. The first is with sizing, and there's different ways to go through sizing, but basically what you do is you treat the paper fibers and pulp with an ingredient that's usually proprietary, so it's a secret recipe of the company. Usually it's something like a starch or something else that's hydrophobic, and what it will do is it will coat those fibers before they are pressed into sheets of paper. That will help prevent ink spread. And then there's something called coating. And so this is when you have like a thin layer of hydrophobic material put onto the top of the paper, and that will make the paper super smooth, super slick, but typically it will also prevent feathering and bleed through. If you've ever used like a roffle paper, you would have that experience of using a coated paper, super thin, super slick. And what happens is when you put ink on the page, it just sits there in pools until it dries instead of like spreading and being absorbed into the paper. And that can lead to sheening, shadings, and other really beautiful ink characteristics. But the downside of a coating is you don't feel the paper grain and it doesn't really feel naturally like paper. Also, your hand oils can impact the way that ink sits on the paper as well. Tomoe River Paper specifically has both a sizing step and then also a coating step. So Tomoe River Paper is coated on both sides, and there's also the proprietary sizing. So that lends it to historically be very fountain pen friendly. Okay, so the first company to produce Tomoe River paper is Tomogawa, and this company was founded in 1914. Now, at this time, World War I was underway, and that created some difficulties with providing supply for electrical insulating paper. Japan was industrializing very quickly and had been importing electrical insulating paper from Germany. What is electrical insulating paper? So this was a type of paper used to wrap around power cables and insulate telegraph lines. And so it was really important for continued industrialization, for communication, and using electricity in homes, buildings, things like that. Because World War I was cutting off the supply of insulating paper, there was a need to start creating it domestically. So a man named Genzaburo Inoue was able to reverse engineer electrical insulating paper that they were importing from Germany, and they were able to start creating it domestically. This takes place over a few years, but he founded the Tomogawa Paper Co., and this was along the Tomoe River in the Shizuoka Prefecture. This was in Shimizu City, and that is the namesake for Tomoe River paper. At the time, fountain pens were not really in mind. This was really paper produced for industrial purposes. Now, there's not a whole lot more to say about that time period. So between 1933 and the 1960s, Tomogawa just kind of quietly expanded. The factory, Shizuoka Works, were built out in 1933, and a pulp company was absorbed in 1945 to secure their own supply chain for pulp to be used to create the paper. And then by the 1960s, they diversified into specialty papers for electronics and industrial use. And so then Tomogawa Paper Co. was nicknamed Tomogawa of Specialty Paper in Japan. And then in 1981, we have Tomoe River Paper. Tomogawa introduced a new lightweight double-coated paper product. And then eventually, we have a Techo being used for this paper. Techo is Japanese for personal planner, and so eventually having one page per day became a bit of a trend. But at the time, it was still considered a commercial product, a printer's tool, nothing really more to it yet, until 2001. In 2001, Hobonichi came to the market and they adopted Tomoe River paper really from day one. And this is even mentioned on their website. So it was really built around this simple idea of having a page a day planner light enough to carry everywhere, which only this paper could do without becoming a super, super thick notebook. And so this is a modern version. I wish I could see what the early 2000s versions looked like, but this was the paper that was used in Hobonichi ever since the beginning. And I think this context is really important to know because it does kind of answer the question of why Hobonichi is still sticking with Tomoe River paper when other companies like Kinokuniya pivoted away from Tomoe River paper when issues started arising and switched to another paper. Hobonichi's brand really was wrapped up with Tomoe River Paper as well. So if they made a pivot away from Tomoe River Paper, it could be a really, really big deal for the brand. But nobody was really thinking about this at the time. For years and years and years, nobody really thought much about how paper was made. And because it was so consistent for 20-something years, there's a lot of trust in Hobonichi products. And then naturally, because the Venn diagram of fountain pens and stationery has such a big overlap, people who were starting to use these products realized that they worked really, really well with fountain pens. And so for a lot of people, Hobonichi was kind of the gateway drug into Tomoe River Paper being a holy grail for fountain pen users. Now, 2001 to 2019 was the Machine 7 era. For nearly 40 years, the paper was made from one specific machine, machine number 7, at Tomogawa's Shizuoka plant. Now, this is a really important part of the story. When you have a piece of equipment, over time, it will develop its own character. So whenever you're creating paper, that can impact the coating ratios of ingredients that are being used to coat the paper, how much coating that you're doing, also pressure of the pressing of the paper, speed, everything calibrates in very tiny ways that are nearly impossible to replicate exactly. And while each of these tiny changes may not seem like it would impact the overall product on their own, when you add all of those little changes up, you could end up with a very different type of product, even on a different machine at the same factory. So in April of 2019, Tomogawa announced that machine number 7 is going to be decommissioned. It was not profitable to keep it running, and so production moved to machine number 9. When paper from machine number 9 reached consumers, people noticed it immediately. The paper was slightly thicker, stiffer, less crinkly. They also noticed that the paper had more drag, lines from writing were less crisp, and some really had flattened sheens on certain inks. So fountain pen ink did not look as good. And what's really crummy is Tomogawa initially denied that anything had changed once they started receiving feedback from the community. But eventually, under community pressure, Tomogawa did confirm that there were some changes. In October of 2021, Tomogawa exits the paper business altogether when it comes to stationery and writing paper. Machine 9 is shut down. Tomoe River, as Tomogawa made it, was finished. In November of 2021, we have Sanzen. Sanzen Paper is a subsidiary of a company called Chetsu Pulp. This is one of Japan's largest paper companies. And in November of 2021, they purchased the rights, the name, the formula, and remaining inventory from Tomogawa, and all of that is sold to Sanzen Paper Manufacturing. So then very quickly, Sanzen starts to produce and ship their own version of Tomoe River Paper almost immediately. And the reception from that was actually pretty good. At the time, people said that while it was not identical paper to the original Tomoe River Paper on machine number 7, it was a real improvement over machine number 9, especially when it comes to sheening and shading. Now, something I want to call out, going back to Hobonichi, is they announced that they are switching their planners to Sanzen's Tomoe River S paper, starting with the 2024 Techo edition. So this means that notebooks bought for the 2024 planner year were Sanzen paper rather than leftover Tomogawa stock. Okay, so let's go to the period of 2023 to 2025. During this time, Sanzen continues to refine Tomoe River paper and try to continue to tweak the formula and make it better and better. The gold standard really is the old Tomoe River Paper formula from machine number 7, so it makes sense that they would try to achieve that themselves. So in the fall of 2024, the 2025 Hobonichi planners launch, and as customers are starting to get their planners in 2024, there's a wave of feathering and bleeding reports, and it becomes a huge public event. There is a Hobonichi subreddit page, and they had a dedicated mega thread. People were posting photos of feathering, bleed through, issues with their paper from Hobonichi. Facebook planner groups compared screenshots side by side of good versus bad paper. And it seemed that there was a lot of online investigations where people were trying to figure out like, was there a particular notebook that was impacted? Is there some kind of pattern we can identify to trace this back to like a bad batch of paper? But it didn't really seem that there was a particular design or size that was impacted. It felt kind of random. And unfortunately, neither Sanzen nor Hobonichi ever officially named a defective batch. So let's talk about this notebook. I want to talk about my own anecdotal experience because I think a lot of people who have been burned by Hobonichi can relate to this. 2 weeks ago, I tested my own notebook for the first time because I thought I was going to use it for a journal. And I bought it from Hobonichi themselves in last September's order, and it is not fountain pen friendly despite all of my other Hobonichi products being fountain pen friendly. The back of this page is virtually unusable to me. So to me, I see this as a defective product. So what I do is I reach out to Hobonichi, I tell them exactly what happened, I try to ask for store credit or replacement. Their first reply was polite but firm. I will screenshot the emails and put them in this video. They said that wood pulp is a natural material and it has slight variations that can occur between individual products. And so feathering, line spread, bleed through cannot be completely avoided depending on ink, pen, paper, and environment. So as a result, they cannot provide any kind of replacement or credit. So I did push back and I did say that I used the same pens and inks on a 2023 Hobonichi notebook. That is this one that I have here. And that I had zero issues at all. It's not an environmental or tool problem, it's the paper. And the second reply, I think, is the one that is the most telling. This is what they said. For the 2026 edition, we worked closely with the paper manufacturer and printing company to make fine adjustments to the paper so that more users could enjoy the writing feel and usability. We have confirmed that the paper used in the 2026 edition meets our quality standards. Still refused to call it a defect. They still declined replacement, a credit, or refund. But they did confirm in writing that they went back to the paper manufacturer to fix something. And so I think this is about as close to an acknowledgement as this kind of correspondent is ever going to get. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to test the fountain pen friendliness of all 13 of my Tomoe River Paper notebooks on camera. So I have 3 years worth of Hobonichi weeks, including old Tomoe River Paper. We have the 2025 Hobonichi weeks, and then we have my current 2026 Hobonichi weeks. I also have 4 A6 style notebooks from Hobonichi. I have a Techo from 2024, a Techo from 2025. I have the freebie A6 grid notebook that came out with the 2025 lineup. And then I also have an A6 plain graph paper notebook from Hobonichi. I have one last page I can use in my old journal. I have this failed A5 size notebook. And then I have 4 A-size notebooks from other companies. So one is a Kanzonoto notebook from Jet Pens. I have a notebook from Lockbee. I have a Tomoe River Paper notebook from Sakai. And then I also have my Kinokuniya Nanbo notebook. So let's talk about how I have been doing my fountain pen friendliness testing, and I'll tell you exactly how I'm going to go about this on the 13 different notebooks. Okay, so I have done 3 paper review videos so far testing out fountain pen friendliness. I started with Arofal paper, I've done Midori paper, I've done CRENA Spark, and I've also done Mini Joy paper. So this is how this is going to go. The first test is going to be a bit of a baseline where I have what I call standard writing. This is going to be a Pilot Kakuno with a fine nib. I want to use a fine nib because it doesn't put out a whole lot of ink. And I'm also going to be using Pilot Black ink. It's just a very standard go-to black ink for writing with fountain pens. It typically does not have any major like sheening or shading. It's not too wet, it's not too dry. It's just a really good baseline. So that's going to be the first writing sample. The second writing sample is going to be with a Pelikan M800 and with Pelikan 4001 Blue Black. This is a pen that puts out a lot of ink, and this ink is actually pretty dry. It has really beautiful shading properties, not really a lot of sheening, so this is going to be the second writing sample. The third writing sample is going to be with a very wet pen and a very wet ink. So this is my Pilot Custom 823. I have a standard media nib on here, and this is going to be paired with Oroshizuku Tsukio. This ink is very wet and lubricated. It has both really beautiful sheening and shading properties, and the color can look more or less vibrant on different kinds of papers. And then the fourth writing sample is going to be a stress test. So this is going to be writing with a dip pen. I have a Kakimori dip pen with a brass nib, and the ink that I'm choosing for this is Sailor Yurimiku Kiyukuya. This is an ink that tends to have a lot of shading, and the color looks different on different kinds of papers. So this will be the fourth writing sample. With all of these writing samples, I'm going to be writing out what the writing sample is, the pen, the nib, the ink, some loops and pen strokes. I'm going to be doing a 10-second dry test, which basically means that once I write out the writing sample, I'm going to wait 10 seconds and then run my finger over it to see how badly it smears. This tells me how quickly the ink will dry on a particular page. And then the next test I'm going to be doing is a fingerprint test. For certain papers, specifically a roval paper, if I touch the page with my hand oils will get onto the page, and then the ink will be impacted with how it dries on the page and how it sits. And sometimes you can see your fingerprints or it looks really splotchy. And so I really like to do this test because I don't really like papers that are heavily impacted by that, because it can really negatively impact my own writing experience. I'll also do an ink swatch with the dip pen for all of these different inks to see if we can get a sense of sheening and shading from an ink swatch as well. So I'm going to be doing this on 13 different notebooks, so I probably won't be putting every single filmed writing sample in this video. It's just going to be way too long, but I'll show a few. I'll do a couple of minutes of writing samples. At the end, though, we are going to very closely and carefully evaluate all of the different writing samples together and see what kind of information we can learn. So let's start with the Hobonichi weeks. Then I will do the A6 sizes, and then at the end I will do the different A5 size notebooks, and then we will talk about how the paper varied with fountain pens from notebook to notebook. All right, so here are all of the 13 notebooks and the writing samples. It's a lot. So here's how I've gone about this. I have closely evaluated all of the writing samples, and then for each paper, I've given it a score. And the different things that I was looking into was feathering, ghosting, bleed through, sheening, shading, and color. I gave a score for the dry test and the fingerprint test. And I've created a table, which I will share with you. I had my husband do the same thing, and then we have a final score for each paper. So I will share that with you in a little bit. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to very quickly show you close-ups for every single paper. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about every single one, but I think it might be helpful to see if your opinions agree with mine when I show you the final result. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the Hobonichi Weeks writing samples first, and then we will talk about how they're different from each other. So this is the Hobonichi Weeks from 2024. And on the Hobonichi website, they did say that this was going to be the last notebook where they are using old stock Tomoe River paper. So this is pre-Sanzen. If we look at this, we can see that everything looks really beautiful, no feathering, and the ink looks very pretty in terms of the sheen, the shade, the color. And as far as ghosting, it is moderate, and there's not really any bleed through. There's almost bleed through for some of the ink swatches, but it's really not too bad. It did take a long time for the ink to dry, and as far as the fingerprint test goes, it did not do that well. But I can see why people really love this paper. I thought it was one of the best overall. And then this is the 2025 Hobonichi Weeks. The feathering is pretty well controlled except for the stress test. There is some feathering there, as you can see. Did not really do well for the fingerprint test. The dry test, it did actually pretty well. It dried really fast, but there's not really any kind of sheening. And then this is what the back looks like. So there's like less ghosting, but more bleed through. And then we have the Hobonichi Weeks from 2026. This is my current one, and this is how things look close up. Pretty good overall. I would say that the lack of sheening of Tsukio here is uncharacteristic compared to some of the other writing samples I've done in this notebook. You can see here that this notebook actually has pretty good sheening for inks. So, that's just kind of something to keep in mind. This is what the back looks like. So minimal to moderate ghosting and no bleed through. And then if we have all of them side by side and look at the backs, we can see that the 2025 is definitely the worst. So this is kind of how they are. I think that the 2024 Hobonichi Weeks has the best sheening and shading potential. Ink looks the prettiest, but it takes the longest time to dry. The 2025 one is definitely the worst, especially with bleed through. And then the 2026 version is pretty good. So it was like really good, worse, pretty good. Okay, so these are the A6 sizes that I have from Hobonichi. Let's start with the 2024 Techo. So this is most likely the early Sanzen Tomoe River paper. It's actually pretty good. There's not really any feathering. I think that the ink color and sheening looks pretty good. The ghosting is minimal. There's propensity for bleed through on like a couple of spots, but it's really not that bad. This is a freebie with the fall 2024 order for the 2025 lineup. And honestly, I think this paper is the best of all of the A6 sizes that I have. I don't know if this is like old stock Tomoe River paper, but it certainly feels like it. The color looks the best. The sheening looks the best. There's no feathering. This looks very similar, in my opinion, to the 2024 weeks, except for the fact that the paper colors are different. And yeah, I have to say this is definitely one of the papers that scored the highest. Next, we have the 2025 A6 Techo. This paper feels very different from the A6 freebie. Again, not really any feathering issues. The ghosting is pretty mild. Almost some bleed through, but it's really not too bad. I would just say that the ink looks kind of dull on this page, but there is some sheening going on with Tsukio. And then finally, for the A6 size, we have the A6 graph notebook. I bought this in spring of this year, and this is pretty good. I would say that the sheening is not as good on this paper as it is for some other papers, but I would say overall it's pretty good. No feathering really. The ghosting is pretty mild, and the bleed through is also pretty mild, I would say. It's really only for the dip pen, but really well behaved overall. Maybe the color doesn't pop as much on this paper as it does with this freebie. I think of all four of these, this one might be the second best. And then finally, we have the A5 size. So I have 6 notebooks here. Let's start with the first one that I've purchased. I purchased this in winter of 2023. This is my personal journal that I was using for the last 2.5 years. And honestly, this I think is some of the best paper. I definitely think that this is pre-Sanzen Tomoe River Paper. All of the inks look really beautiful. Sheening and shading looks great. The color looks great. As far as ghosting goes, kind of hard to evaluate because I use the back of this page as a test page, but I've been using this paper for the past 2.5 years and the ghosting is pretty mild and I have not really had hardly any bleed through issues at all. So again, one of the highest rated papers to come out of this experiment. Next, I have this Lockbee A5 notebook. This is the only one that has 68 GSM, but this is how things are looking. I think the colors look pretty good. Again, not really a lot of feathering issues, but there is a little bit with the dip pen, as you can see here. So I would say that this paper is pretty good. It's not bad, but not great. This is what the back looks like. The ghosting is, I would say mild to moderate, but there is a little bit of bleed through in some areas. Next, I have this Numble notebook from Kinokuniya. The employee at the store told me that this is some of the best paper for fountain pens and they don't make it anymore. So I'm assuming this is pre-Sanzen Tomoe River Paper. Everything looks really beautiful. I think that the colors look the best on this paper versus all of the other papers that I tested. No feathering. The sheening looks really beautiful. The ghosting is moderate and there is propensity for bleed through. Again, this one looks very similar to the pre-Sanzen Tomoe River Paper. There is a little bit of propensity for bleed through from the dip pen, but other than that, really, really beautiful. Again, this is just one of my favorite papers for fountain pens. Next, I have this Tomoe River Paper notebook. This is from the brand that creates the Rofel notebook. I think it's Sakai or Sakai. This is how the writing samples look. It is okay. I think that this is actually pretty similar to the Lockbee notebook. No feathering issues really, except for one spot from the stress test. You can see that on the 4. The colors look pretty good. It does have some sheening and shading potential. It's not like the most amazing, but it's pretty good. And then this is what the back looks like. Ghosting is mild to moderate and not really bleed through, but almost bleed through on some of the ink swatches. And then the next two are probably the worst performing. So this is the Kanzo Noto notebook from Jet Pens. This is what the notebook looks like. I use this in my ink review series, and you can see that this one does have quite a bit of feathering. You can see that on the 1 for the 10 in the 10-second dry test. You can also see it in the writing sample for Tsukio and the stress test. It does feather quite bad. This paper has been shown to be prone to feathering and bleed through. And what's really interesting is on the Jet Pens website, if you look at the reviews, some reviews say that this paper is phenomenal with fountain pens, and some say that it's terrible and have bad experiences like me. It seems like this notebook is one of those Russian roulette type of notebooks. Some are good and some are bad, and that's something that I will speak to here shortly. But as you can see, the dry test performed so well. Even the first one didn't smear at all. This paper specifically, it just feels like it absorbs the ink very quickly. And while that's good in that it doesn't smear very much, that means that you're not going to get any kind of sheen. So Tsukio looks super flat on this paper. And the ghosting is pretty abysmal. For the dry ink, it's mild, but for everybody else, It's so bad that the back of this page is pretty much unusable and there is some bleed through going on. The last notebook that I have is the Hobonichi A5 graph notebook. And so that is this one that I've talked about before being like a really big fail for me. I was planning on using this as my journal, but as you can see that it does not perform very well at all. So this is how everything looks up close. There is definitely some feathering going on. You can see that in this writing sample here around the M in medium, and then the stress test looks just pretty abysmal. Like the Kanza Noto notebook, the ink does dry very quickly, so there's not a lot of smearing, but as a result, the ink looks very, very flat, no sheening at all whatsoever. And the back is unusable, it even bled through to the other page. So pretty disappointing there. The Kanzo Noto notebook and the most recent A5 Hobonichi notebooks performed the worst. The notebooks that performed the best were the ones that seemed to have evidence of them being pre-Sanzen. Now, as far as post-Sanzen from Lockbee, Jet Pens, the Nomble notebook, and the Sakai notebook, those seem to be either okay or bad. So what I'm going to do is I am going to put a table on the screen and talk about how I evaluated all of these. I am a data scientist by trade, and so I wanted to basically score everything here and make a plot to see if I can identify a pattern. So here's how I scored these notebooks. So for each notebook, I looked at 8 different categories: feathering, ghosting, bleed through, sheen, shade, color, dry time, and a fingerprint test. For each of those 8 categories, I gave the notebook a score of 1 to 5. 1 being unacceptable, 5 being amazing, 3 being okay, and then 2 is not good, and 4 is pretty good. Now, when doing all these metrics, I usually incorporate dry time because I am a very impatient person. I want to write something down and flip the page and not wait for the ink to dry. Now, when it comes to fountain pen friendly paper, dry time is really inversely correlated with sheening potential. So the way sheening works is ink dries slowly on a page and it pools and it crystallizes. And so that's what creates the really beautiful reflective sheens that we see. And that takes more time. If your ink dries very quickly on a page, typically the paper is just really sucking up the ink like a sponge and you don't get any sheening. And that's why we don't see any sheening with the Kanzo Noto notebook or the Hobonichi A5 graph notebook that I had problems with. There's no sheening, but the dry time was very short. So in the final score, what I did was I averaged all of these scores for every category, but not the dry test because I felt like that was an outlier. A paper that had a high score for dry test would score poorly in every other category, and because it's inversely correlated, I decided not to include that. So for 7 categories, I gave each paper a score of 1 to 5. I averaged them. And then I had my husband score every single notebook too, independently using the same criteria. And I did this because I have my own biases and I wanted to ensure that the score is not just based on my opinion. I wanted an extra set of eyes to make sure that this is as objective as it can be. So in the end, we averaged our own scores across the 7 different categories, and then I took my average and I added it to his average to get a notebook's final total. So the notebook that scored the best overall was this notebook here. This is the 2024 Hobonichi Weeks. It's also the notebook that we have confirmed as being pre-Sanzen Tomoe River Paper. Again, I don't know if this is like Tamagawa's machine number 7 or 9 or what, but this is the one that performed the best. And the runner-up was this A6 Hobonichi freebie notebook. And like I said, I suspect this is also pre-Sanzen Tomoe River Paper. This one is very, very similar to the Hobonichi Weeks, especially like looking at the back of the paper. I think that they are very distinct. They feel very similar, very crinkly, almost like onion skin. So these two of some of the earliest Hobonichi purchases that I've made are the ones that have the best performing papers. And the worst performing ones I've already mentioned based on the scores are these two. The Kanzo Noto notebook from Jet Pens, and then also Another Night of Falling Star Sparkles A5 grid notebook from Hobonichi. Okay, so What else can we learn from this? Is there a trend? Can we identify from all of these scores and notebooks if there was like a singular year where there was a bad batch? What pattern can we identify? What about the other companies? All right, so let's talk about the results. What I did was I took the combined scores from my husband and I's assessments on each of the different papers, and I created this plot here. So you'll see along the x-axis is the purchased year. So that is the year that I purchased the notebook. On the y-axis is the combined score from my husband and I. Each point represents one notebook, and I have them colored by the brand. Majority of these notebooks are from Hobonichi, so that is what you see in red. And then the Kanzanoto notebook from Jet Pens is in yellow, Lockbee is in green, the Namble notebook from Kinokuniya is in blue, and the Sakai TP notebook is in purple. A few things jump out immediately. The first thing that jumps out is variability gets worse, not better, as you move to the right on this chart. My 2023 purchases cluster pretty high, so you can see that the scores are between 7 and 9, no matter the brand. So I purchased from Hobonichi and Lockbee in 2023. By 2024, you still have notebooks that are scoring highly, but then you also see some notebooks that are starting to get a lower score. And then 2025, this gets even worse. 2026, I only have one data point. It is a notebook from Hobonichi that was pretty good. The second note that I want to make from these observations is that the average quality looks lower in the more recent years, not just more scattered. So you can see that the average quality in 2023 is sitting around 8. By 2024, it's around 7, 7.5. 2025, it's like a 6. 2026, again, I only have one data point. I can't compute an average, but you can see that the variability increases with time, and then also the average quality tends to decrease. The two worst notebooks are from 2025, the Kanzanoto notebook and Hobonichi notebook, which shows that it's not just one company that's being impacted. And then the third point to make here is that there is no clear pattern here. It's not that Hobonichi is bad, everyone else is good. It's not that recent is bad. Different brands, same supply chain, same unpredictable mix of good and bad. It just shows that there is increased variability of quality, and that suggests worsened quality control overall. So where does that leave us, especially heading into Hobonichi season this month? Now, my honest opinion here is that when it's good, Tomoe River Paper is actually really special. And I do have a recent notebook that has Tomoe River Paper in it from this year that performs really well. And to be honest, I'm still going to buy products that have Tomoe River Paper in them, but I think at this point I'm going to be a little bit more mindful when I do that and not jump on it with so much confidence and trust that it's going to work out. I think it's worth noting before the launch window of Hobonichi or other planners during planner season. These companies are not your friends. Hobonichi, even Jet Pens, Yoseka, Goulet Pens, they are not your friends. They have cute social media, they have behind the scenes videos, and a sense that you know the brand. It's a parasocial relationship, and it's a marketing strategy. It works because it makes you question the brand less because you feel like you know them on a personal level. The company is not a person, it is an entity designed to make money. And I'm not saying that the people who work at these companies are bad people by any means. I do want to urge that a lot of these companies do seem like they have people working there who are passionate about the quality of their products. So I don't want to demonize them, but I think that it's important to keep in mind that we should still have a level of skepticism when seeing their content online. And I think between the parasocial relationship and the fear of missing out and scarcity, such as limited runs, hyped release dates, a countdown before a launch, it's important to remember that all of this is designed to get your emotional brain to override your logical brain. So you buy faster and think less. It's what marketing does, and Hobonichi is very, very good at marketing. So as this year's release approaches, I just want you to remember that. Remember that it's a company running a playbook. It doesn't mean don't buy it. I just want you to buy it on your own terms with your eyes open. So is this year actually going to have better quality paper from Hobonichi? The honest answer is we don't know. What I can tell you is that the 2026 Hobonichi weeks was better than the 2025 Hobonichi weeks. But The A5 graph notebook was really, really bad. And I also got this notebook at the same time as my 2026 weeks. So the complicated answer as to whether this year's paper will be better is it seems like based on the data that I've shown today, it's still going to be a game of Russian roulette and that it will be random. Apparently, for the 2026 lineup that came out last year, it was independently reviewed before release by testers who got early copies, and their verdict was that the paper felt smoother, a little thicker, and more reliable across writing tools than the 2025 paper, and it had less bleed through overall. And I do think that for the weeks, that is definitely my experience, but not for the A5 graph notebook. By most independent accounts, the average unit really did seem to improve, but this notebook still failed me. And, with their claims saying that the average quality of a print run increased, it doesn't guarantee that an individual copy is going to be good. So there's still no way for a customer to know whether they're going to get a good notebook or a not so good notebook. So the 2027 Hobonichi lineup is scheduled to launch September 1st of this year, and as of filming this video today, there is no public paper quality information yet. Nobody outside of Hobonichi and Sanzen knows what this year's batch will actually look like. And if history is any guide, I would expect that some buyers are still going to be getting bad notebooks. And that's just the pattern I've seen and what the data supports. I personally am still planning to get a Hobonichi Weeks for 2027. I am still excited to see the covers. I like Hobonichi overall as a brand, but they are definitely not without their faults. That is the end of this very lengthy video. Thank you so much for being here this entire video. I know it was a lengthy one. I did get on my soapbox a bit, so thank you so much for sticking around. If you have had positive customer experiences with Hobonichi when it comes to getting a notebook that didn't perform as well as you wanted it to, I would love to read that down below. I would also love to know in the comments if you had an experience similar to mine. Are you planning to get a product from Hobonichi this year? Are you excited for their lineup? Or do you feel kind of disillusioned like I do and look at it through a skeptical lens? Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!